Stranded, Chapter 3. Buzz's mind was a jumble of panic, fear, and blind confusion. He heard everyone talking at once in the dark, but not what any of them were saying. Jane screamed. Joe was saying something about SOS. Vanessa and Carter were yelling, maybe even at each other. The only light in the shifting galley came through the hatchway from several more flashes of lightning, one after the other. He was on the ground somewhere near the back of the boat. That much Buzz knew. It felt like they had crashed, but if that was the case, why were they still moving? The first thing that made any kind of sense was the stinging chill of water rising fast around his feet and hands. The shock of it sent him into action, moving faster now than he had in a long time. He felt his way through the dark into the rear cabin. It was a small space, so it wasn't hard to find the two tall steps at the back. Struggling to keep his balance, Buzz reached for the place where he knew the companionway door to be. As soon as his fingers landed on the latch, he threw it open and he leaned out into the cockpit where Dexter was holding on to the captain's wheel, trying to steer the boat against the storm. "What are you doing?" Dex screamed over the wind. "Get below!" "We can't," Buzz shouted back. "It's flooding! Water's coming in fast!" He pointed back the way he'd come. Dexter crouched down to see past him, his headlamp shining inside. When Buzz turned to look for himself, he saw Joe herding the others up the stairs on the opposite side. The water had continued to pour in. It was past Joe's knees already and nearly up to Jane's waist. Dexter pulled Buzz up onto his feet in the cockpit, and he slammed the companionway door closed. "Take the wheel!" he shouted in his ear. There was no question of yes or no. "Hold on as tight as you can. I'll be right back." "I don't know how to do this," Buzz shouted. Carter was always the one begging to steer the boat, not him. And now he was supposed to learn in the middle of the world's biggest storm? "You can do it," Dex said. "Just hang on." "Wait!" Buzz's heart was racing as fast as the wind that whipped past him. There wasn't even time to think. "Where are you going?" "To open the life raft," Dex shouted just before he left. "We're getting off the boat." Carter stood at the top of the galley stairs in the downpour. Jane hovered just behind him, grasping his waist with both hands. Vanessa was there too, holding on to the small banister for balance. "Where's Joe going?" she asked. "I don't know," Carter said, and leaned farther out to sea. Joe had turned a 180 from the stairs and was working his way back toward the middle of the boat where Dex was waiting for him. They quickly started wrestling with the straps that kept the big life raft capsule lashed to the deck. Carter felt a cold sense of dread run through him. They were going to have to abandon ship, weren't they? This was even worse than he had thought. "Wait here!" Carter shouted at Vanessa and Jane. He clipped himself to the jackline on that side, and he started to follow back the way Joe had gone. He'd barely taken a few steps before the boat pitched hard again and sent him stumbling to his knees, then flat on the deck. Even from where he was, though, he could hear the two men shouting at each other over the storm. "I don't think we can launch in these conditions," Joe yelled. "We don't have to. We don't have a choice," Dex bellowed back. "But how are we? One of us has to go in with it." And that was it. There was no more conversation. Within a minute, they'd freed up the capsule. Each of them took a side and they heaved the whole thing into the water where it opened up automatically, unfolding and inflating at the same time. Suddenly, there was a bright orange canopied disc bobbing on the waves, but it was also drifting quickly away from the boat. "Get it!" Carter heard Dexter shout. "I'll throw you a line." Carter watched from the edge of the deck as Joe dove without any hesitation. He disappeared into the churning water and then resurfaced several yards away. With some effort, he managed to swim over to the raft and scramble up into it. Working quickly, Dexter had already unspooled an orange floater on a line of rope and tossed it straight out to where Joe was. He wrapped the other end of the line around his own waist, wedged his foot against one of the cleats on the deck, and then motioned for Carter to bring the others over. When Carter looked back, Vanessa was out on the deck, but she had clipped herself in on the other side away from the life raft, and Jane was still peeking around from the stairwell, and he couldn't see Buzz at all. "Come on!" Dex shouted. He held on to the line with one hand, and he motioned for them to stay low as they came. The boat heeled again to the side, and he stumbled to keep on his feet. "Let's go! Let's go!" "Are we getting off the boat?" Jane yelled when Carter reached her. It was easier to nod than try to answer right now, and he still needed to get Vanessa and Buzz. "Hurry!" Dex yelled again. Carter turned to look, and he caught sight of Buzz somewhere over near the cockpit. That's when the next crash of lightning hit. Even with the storm raging, it was deafeningly loud. Carter saw a bright flash from somewhere near the top of the mast, like an explosion of light and force. The sailboat itself twisted nearly all the way around with a violent turn. The life raft veered off in the opposite direction, and Dexter, still holding on to the line, lost his footing altogether. Before Carter could try to get to him, Dex slammed into the railing, flipped over it, and was dragged all the way overboard by the force. Jane screamed, "No!" Vanessa shouted. In a matter of seconds, the boat was driven in one direction and the life raft in another. It was too dark to see clearly, but Carter could just make out the flashing orange light rigged to the raft and the vague glow of Uncle Dexter's headlamp in the water. As Joe used the rope line to haul him in, Dex was shouting something back their way, but it was impossible to make out a single word. Carter stepped onto the rail. He thought about diving in after them, but that seemed like suicide. And he couldn't leave the others, so instead he looked around desperately for another length of rope. Anything that he might use to pull Dex back in, but it was already too late. By the time he looked out toward the water again, Dex, Joe, and the life raft had all disappeared completely into the storm.